Welcome back to Worst Seats in the House. Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta, joining you from the latest day after the season, Anthony. It's always the weirdest day to wake up. I had a 6 a.m. flight, 7 a.m. flight today to Vegas, and I was going to leave for the airport at 4:30 in the morning, and I was in the elevator ride on the way down, canceling my Uber, canceling my flight to Game 7, my flight home from Game 7, where I would have used that ticket to maybe go to Edmonton if they were going to advance to Game 7. And you know, it's one of the weirder series that I feel like I've covered, because they've lost 8 straight in the first round or qualifying round, and yet you feel like they could still be playing. And like, I don't want to start like totally like this, but we haven't had a chance to talk about it on the podcast. They probably could still be playing if it wasn't for Gustav, Nyquist, and that just sloppy offsides that cost them a victory in Game 5, plain and simple. Well,
there's so much to unpack for this series, but let's first just talk about your feeling with the end of the season, because I share the same thing. And the end of seasons there's such a sudden, the end was very sudden, as they say, you know, and you think about it. I was talking about
what was that
this,
Seinfeld line?
It was he was sick. It was from Fletch. And they said that he was dying for years. And he says, well, yeah, but the end was very sudden. But it is. I was thinking about this last night as I was reflecting back on the year, and you're in the same boat as I am, where for 7 months, all you think about is the Minnesota Wild. And it's, a game gets over and it's, what do you want to talk about tomorrow? Who do they play tomorrow? Who's the next game? I was talking with Karts about this as we walked out of the booth. It's for 7 consecutive months. You literally don't do anything without somewhere in your mind, you're thinking about an idea for tomorrow's show. I get a text from Wes or Karts like, hey, I was thinking about this for tomorrow, thinking about this. Where are we going on the next trip? Where are our off nights on the next trip? Where are we going to dinner? You see the same people every day at the rink. You're talking to the same people, and it's all about that. And then in literally a snap, it's over. That last shift ends and the season's over. And it's such a...
And I agree with you. Like, I've had it when Patrick Kane scored that one goal by Harvey. Like, takes you a second to like realize like,
yeah, I'm all done.
Yeah.
And as you walk to the elevator I was fully expecting that the Wild were going to win last night and go to Vegas. So I had packed for 4 days in Vegas because I wasn't going to go with the team to either Edmonton or LA, but we were packed to leave. We were going to fly out last night if the Wild had won. And you go to the arena thinking that, and then all of a sudden you're walking out and it's like saying goodbye to Jim and Kelly in the elevator, and like, okay, well, good to see you guys. I mean, I've seen you guys daily for 7 months. So it's such an empty feeling. And you wake up today and the season's really over, and you'll never cover this team again. The team will never be exactly the same. And you never know what next season might bring. It's really for people that haven't experienced that, where you're hands-on and you're involved with a team like that. It is such a strange, empty feeling when you wake up the next day realizing it's over. The season's done. And now it's 5 months before we'll drop the puck again.
Yeah, it's going to be an eventful offseason, and we'll unpack a lot of this during this show. And by the way, stay tuned to our social media. We're hoping to do one live show this month, probably in the next couple of weeks. Maybe next week, maybe the following week. It depends a lot on my travel, because I'm not sure if I'm covering the end of the second round for the Athletic, or if I'll just take the rest of this round off and then I'm definitely covering the conference final and the Stanley Cup final. Let's go back to
let's go to this to the series, like you said, because now, yes, that play is the play everybody's going to remember.
I mean, for the rest of time.
Right. And because think about now, there's no guarantee they win the series.
Right.
Let's assume.
Or even technically the game, right? They had 1:15 left.
Yeah. But let's just assume that Game 6 goes exactly as it went, even if Minnesota was up 3-2, which I don't know that it would have, but let's just say it did. They'd still have been on a plane last night having to win a game in Vegas to win the series. But such a gut punch. Maybe I can't think of another play. The Kane overtime winner is right up there. The St. Louis overtime winner by Edmondson in Game 1 of that series is close, because it was a game.
Charlie Coyle just
and Minnesota was dominant for 65, 70 minutes of that game. I can't think of another one though like this, where it was such a series swing. And It's I never talked to Gus Nyquist about it afterward.
Yeah, they have not made him available.
And it's really,
I don't know. Like, I don't know if this is him or the team is saying that he's not available. So he hasn't personally declined comment. But like, if I screwed up like this, I would want to freaking fall on the ice so everybody in the world could hear it. And like, I'm sorry. Like, I know everybody's offsides. Hartman, Adam Beckman doesn't have an NHL goal because of, Foligno's been offside. It happens. Right. But this was not Hartman bobbling the puck, going parallel. No. This was a veteran that has done nothing here and has since his being brought back. That's 35 years old. That just was totally like careless.
What was strange about it is it's such a hockey instinct to drag your foot if it's ever close. And he just didn't do that at all. So I don't know if he, like I said, he hasn't said anything. So I don't know if he just didn't realize where he was on the ice. And now what I've wondered about this a couple times is, number one, that you watch hockey at any level and guys, even when it's obvious that they're going to be onside, they just always drag their foot.
Yeah.
It's a habit, and he just didn't do that. But the second thing is how critical people are of the one mistake. There's a million different mistakes that happen over the course of a series.
Without a doubt.
And let's just say that Nyquist had done what he did in the Dallas series and had come in and let's say he had 5 assists in the series. Do you think people would still have the same vitriol toward him right now? Or do you think this is all building because of the fact that he did so little?
I actually think they would have the same. I agree with you, but I also think
I'm just asking.
I think they would have the same vitriol. But this was, I go back to, this was a bad trade deadline by the Wild. It was just plain and simple. Like, you'd almost rather they do nothing. They traded for Brazeau, a guy that we immediately saw in that first game is not a great skater. He's allegedly really good with his hands below the dot, yet he didn't score one goal with his stick with the Wild. And last night could have tied the game up on an exact play. The Trenyon to Rossi goal in game 4, was it?
Well, they had one in 3 and 4.
Yeah, the one in game 4 where Trenyon went on the forecheck. He did the exact same thing last night, right after Vegas takes a 2-1 lead. And puts it right on Brazeau's stick, right in the slot. And it wasn't even a flub. The puck just like died on his blade. And then Nyquist was at the time, statistically, the worst even strength forward in the NHL, right in front of Murat Huznadinov, by the way. And he came here and proved it. He didn't score 1 5-on-5 goal with the Wild. And it also shows you how quickly somebody could age, because that guy, it's amazing. He had, as much as I love Gus Nyquist, it's amazing he had 75 points last year.
It is. And even the year before, when he was hurt all year, when he came back, he still looked like the Gus Nyquist that we had seen before. Right. He had some jump and
and to trade a 2nd-round pick in 2026 for him. By the way, now because of that, they couldn't probably do a significant offer sheet even if they wanted to. And then, to give up what they gave up for Brazeau, which I know you and I both don't care on that.
The Brazeau trade to me is a non-factor because the two guys they gave up. But it
becomes a factor when you, and we saw it in the playoffs 2 years ago, when a GM makes trade, you feel you have to, as a coach, play him. And there's nothing Nyquist could do to even get off his line, let alone out of the lineup. Yeah. And there was nothing that Brazeau could do to get out of the lineup.
The Brazeau thing, I view differently with Brazeau because of the fact that the guys they gave up were bringing nothing to the table here. Mm-hmm. Lauko and Huznadinov, but that was not going to be a factor in this series. Mm-hmm. The Wild needed a physical 4th line in this series. They got that 4th line was actually good in the series. I know Brazeau didn't score, but he did have a couple of assists in the series. And that line was not the issue. The issue was they got no scoring from Gaudreau and Nyquist and Johansson until last night. I thought Johansson was great in game 6. Mm-hmm. But that line, when you looked at it going into game 6, Nyquist 0 points, Gaudreau 0 points, Johansson 1 point. That was the difference in this series, is that Vegas got scoring from all of their lines. Minnesota got 2 goals from Rossi. They got 2 assists from Trenyon and Brazeau. If you get that from your 4th line, plus they changed a couple games with Trenyon was 3rd in the league in the league in hits during the playoffs.
So then let me ask you a question again. Like, Trenyon was John Hines' guy. Right. How does he not elevate? Well, how do you not look? how do you not look at Gus Nyquist and say he's bringing absolutely nothing? I'm going to play Trenyon. Trenyon had this. They gave this guy a 4-year deal at $3.5 million, and he played the second fewest minutes in the playoffs.
Yeah,
he never elevated, even though it was very clear he was a different player all postseason.
I thought that was one of the that is, to me, that's a different question. Let's first just finish up the Nyquist thing, and I think the Wild, to say they had a bad trade deadline might be an exaggeration, because I think the Brazeau deal was a non-factor, and I actually think they were just as fine. They were just as good with Brazeau, maybe better in this series than. It's not a coincidence their penalty kill took off when you got Husnudinov and Lauko off of it, because those guys were a mess, and they did nothing offensively when they were here anyway. Now, the Nyquist thing, they made the deal early before the trade deadline because I think they had targeted and looked at what other guys were going to get, what it was going to take to get Nelson, what it was going to take to get Granlund. You look at what those packages were, and I think they thought, we got to get ahead of this and make a deal before those other guys disappear, and all of a sudden somebody is looking at Nyquist and offering more than what we are. I thought a 2 was a lot to give up for him at the time. We talked about it at the time that neither one of us were crazy about the addition, just with what we had seen from him when we saw him face to face. Now, the year before, he did have 75 points, and so you always give the Wild the benefit of the doubt, and
that's probably what they're thinking is like, right, put him on a good team,
right?
Like, how can you lose such a step in 1 year?
And the fact that they had seen him the end of the season before, liked him as a person, liked his presence around the room, and he was good in that playoff series against Dallas. So you can understand why they made the move. I just thought it seemed like a strange addition for a guy that looked like he was off all year, and it turned out he was. He just wasn't the same player when he got here. But
by the way, aside, can I just say one thing? This is why I'd be careful signing Brock Nelson this year. Same age, it could change like that.
Yes,
you
can.
Father
Nelson's
Time
a different player, though.
But Father Time does not discriminate, and he's 34, turning 35, I believe. And I just feel like if you're going to give him term, you better be freaking careful. Like, it just and it's not like he's been great in Colorado.
No, it hasn't been great in Colorado, but he was really good the last 2 seasons with New York. And he's a different player, different role. But let's just wrap up the Nyquist thing, which is, it was the one thing that surprised me about the way, and I think John Hines has been really good all year at having a handle on who's going that night and moving guys around. And I was a little bit surprised that, especially in some of these games, and I have a theory on it, but I was a little surprised he didn't go that way, the way you're talking about. I would have loved to have seen Rossi play with Trenyon and Foligno and throw Johansson up with Zuccarello and Hartman when Johansson was clearly going like he was last night. And just be a little more willing to say, hey, look, this guy's just not bringing anything, and let's move him down. I think that there was a little bit of reluctance to shorten the bench too much because of the fact that when you get into overtime in the playoffs, you don't know how long that overtime is going to last. Mm-hmm. It isn't 5 minutes like it is in the regular season. And if you start really shortening your bench too early in games, now you're running the risk that, okay, what's going to happen at the end of an overtime, like we saw in game 4, where he had shortened his bench, particularly on defense, but even up front. And as that overtime was winding down, the Wild looked tired. So I think there's a little bit of that, but I always hate to second guess, but this is one spot that even during games, I just thought, boy, I'm surprised that we're seeing as much of a line that is bringing so little offensively, and less of a line that I think had some shifts that changed momentum in games. And I thought Yakov Trenyon was great in the playoffs. And actually it was interesting to think back that you had a conversation with Barry Trotz sometime a couple months before the season was over, meetings. And he had made the comment, like, wait till the playoffs to judge this guy. And I think he was right on, because Trenyon was an impact player in this series and probably could have been a bigger impact player. And that'll be something the Wild will have to reevaluate as they go forward.
Yep, I agree. Let's talk about Rossi. We talked about him a lot on the last show, and just the way that they were using him and things like that. I will say, I don't know if they're going to feel validated, vindicated, but if you look at a couple of the pivotal plays in the series at the end in games 5 and 6, he had his fingerprints all over it. I don't blame him for the double minor. That was a veteran move by Brady McNabb. Unfortunately, even if they reviewed it, it's going to be a penalty, right? It's his stick. They're not going to take it away.
And it was going to be a double minor.
But
because
what are the for such a disciplined team this season, the fact that 2 double minors in this series turned the games upside down, the Boyum and Rossi. But then you look at the winning goal in Vegas in Game 5. He is totally out of position. He doesn't engage after the puck battle, after Bogosian F's up, and then obviously doesn't intercept the pass going to the front to Brett Howden. And then last night, again, he is elevated. He's playing with Kaprizov and Boldy on the winning goal instead of Eriksson Ek. And who's the guy that doesn't close fast enough on Brady McNabb before that pass? It's Marco. This is the type of stuff that clearly is probably why they didn't, he was -9 in his last 12 games. Like, this is probably why they didn't trust putting him in big positions. I don't know if I'm willing to go the route that it was deserved that they didn't trust him, but I think a lot of it was playing with his head and things like that. But yeah, this is going to be a huge story this offseason because I don't think he's happy. I know the Wild are probably motivated to trade him even before this. And I really don't think we're going to see Marco play another game in this sweater. Like, I really don't. I'm telling you, he could say all the right things in a couple of days. I don't think he's very happy about the way that he was treated here.
And well, I don't know about treated, but he shouldn't be happy with the way the season ended for sure. And so there's a few things, and I've thought about this quite a bit this morning, actually, before we started doing the show. And number one is Marco Rossi had 60 points this season, and he brings a skill set that the Wild have not had in a center ever. He's a legit playmaker with the ability to finish. I got tired of hearing people say that, he's too soft, too weak. He scored more goals within 15 feet of the net than anybody on the Wild roster by almost double what Eriksson Ek had. Now, Eriksson Ek was hurt part of the season, but if you even break it down per 60 minutes, he exceeded Eriksson Ek. He's willing to do that. Number two is that when he was demoted in this series, and he was demoted quickly, it was after Game 1, goes down to the fourth line. It was even
in Game 1.
Or goes down to the fourth line to play with Yakov Trenyan and Justin Brazeau, who, you've made your opinion clear on Brazeau, and Trenyan, for what he did bring, is not exactly an electric scorer. And yet Rossi went down there. I think back to so many of the conversations we had. How can you tell if Murat Husnadinov is any good if you're playing him on the fourth line? Well, Marco Rossi went down to the fourth line and scored goals in back-to-back games. And there's something to be said for that. He didn't disappear when playing with those guys. Mm-hmm. He still scored twice. Yep. And in very few minutes and almost zero opportunity chances. It's not like he's playing with playmakers, but he scored twice. So you got to give him credit for that. 60 points during the season, you have to give him credit for that. There were certainly shortcomings. And he was all year a guy that you'd say was responsible defensively, even if maybe not as rigid. And that was exposed in this playoff series. He was often in the right place, but just not strong enough in battles.
But what about the pace? Like, that's where they, I think, really don't.
But the last point of this is going to be, and I talked with Wes Walsh quite a bit going into this series. He made the comment last night on our postgame show that there are players in the league that have that little it factor that allows them to elevate their game by the 10% that you have to be able to elevate when you get to the playoffs. And his point last night was that Ryan Hartman has proven to be one of those guys that just has that next gear, that next level when the playoffs start. But now think about this. It can't be overlooked, shouldn't be overlooked. This was Marco Rossi's first trip into the playoffs. And I think what we saw last night is he didn't elevate his game that 10%. But 6 games, still had 2 goals and an assist, and largely playing on the fourth line. Kirill Kaprizov's first playoff, 7 games, 2 goals, 1 assist. Matt Boldy's first 2 playoffs, 12 games, 1 goal, 3 assists. Ryan Hartman's first 3 trips to the playoffs, 18 games, 2 goals, no assists. Now look at what those guys have done as they've had another taste of the playoffs. Kaprizov has 18 points in 18 games in the last 3 playoffs. Boldy this year was a very different player. Had, 7 points in 6 games. Ryan Hartman's last 3 years in the playoffs, 16 points in 18 games. I think you have to allow a little bit of forgiveness to Rossi to say, this was the first time you ever experienced what that's all about. And it took every one of those other guys a second trip to the playoffs to figure that out. And maybe it's a little bit too quick to judge, to say he didn't have it, he wasn't competitive enough. That's the first time he's seen what it is to watch Vegas elevate their game from the regular season to the postseason. And now maybe he's now aware of it. And it's not to excuse him for the mistakes he made or to try and say that he's a different player than what you're describing. I just think it's not that crazy to think that it was an adjustment that was likely to fail with his first trip into that postseason pace.
I couldn't agree more, more with you. I think that that's exactly how I feel. But we're not in the front office. And we're not on the coaching staff. And the difference between what you just said and all those guys is that he's the one that has to be re-signed this summer, where the other guys didn't.
The other guys didn't, and that's for sure. And Boldy was younger his first two trips. Kaprizov was about the same age as Rossi right now, his first trip.
It's decision time with him, and I just had to think.
No. I'm not trying to guess what the Wild is going to do. I'm just saying, as I look back on it and evaluate it, I just think there's a little bit you have to remember that it just didn't. Kaprizov didn't look like Kaprizov now his first trip. Neither did Boldy, neither did Hartman, and those were the three guys that were maybe Minnesota's best three forwards in this series, and none of them, their first time in the playoffs, went in and carried through what they had done in the regular season into the playoffs.
Great points. We'll be right back. The weather is warming up, and that means it's time to put your augers away, and it's time to grab the boat. Let Onyx Fish help you find the next best bite. The Fish app offers the most comprehensive fishing tool for increasing your success. Use the Fish app to find new places to fish and sort lakes by species, abundance, trophy, and keeper potential. Onyx Fish also shows you hotspots, lake by lake regulations, and private and public land ownership information. Download Onyx Fish on the App Store or go to onyxmaps.com/fish to get more information about the app that is changing the game. If you're looking for a refreshing THC drink, well, check out Giggly. It tastes like your favorite cocktail with no aftertaste and just pure, bold flavor. It's made with real fruit juice and all natural ingredients. It's a Minnesota-made gem. You can find it at liquor stores and Quick Trip locations across Minnesota, or get it shipped nationwide. Plus, with a new low pricing and low-calorie options, it's the perfect guilt-free sip. Try Giggly today. Welcome out to Worst Seats in the House. Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta, coming to you from Shoreview. And again, pay attention to our social media for our next live show. It could even be next week, so make sure you pay attention to the Talk North X account and Instagram, and also Russo Hockey and Anthony LaPanta. Where do you want to go now? Let's talk about Foligno and before we go to Boldy and Kaprizov, let's talk about Foligno and Hartman.
They're outstanding,
unbelievable. And Marcus Foligno looked like freaking. He looked like he just like that play he made last night. For the two of them with their relentlessness all series, like the way that Hartman, the way Hartman individually scored that goal in Game 5 that was overturned. For the most part, discipline, but Foligno on that last play, just forechecking the heck out of the puck, forces a turnover up by Hanifin, and then the way he recognizes the end of the period coming and, spins away from Hanifin to find Hartman in a soft spot on just a broken, bad, probably, it was Bruce Cassidy said after the game, it's one of those plays that just drives a coach nuts because it's something they're usually able to sort out. But, they just all series long, like Foligno just brought it.
Yeah,
and Hartman just brought it.
And Hartman, for me, I thought his game was different from the time he came back from the suspension, but he elevated in the playoffs. And it also would probably be a little bit maddening when you'd say, this is what's possible for this guy. Where was it for 82 games? Where was it for 82 games last year? But now he looks like the guy who scored 34 a couple of years ago, all of a sudden, when the stakes were the highest. He was drawing penalties. He was antagonistic without crossing the line. If you can bottle that up and carry that over into next year, now all of a sudden when you start to look at a lineup and you say, okay, well, maybe Maybe it could be Hartman in a top 6 role. Maybe it's Hartman on a third line with Marcus Foligno that now could be a third line that is dangerous. Go back to the Grief line a few years ago, and maybe he could fill that role for you. Foligno, I just think, had a terrific year all year in every phase, in every part of the game, was huge on penalty kills, physical but yet disciplined, a leader on and off the ice, a guy that proved he has a little bit of ability to score too, hits with a purpose. Like, he wasn't just running around piling up hits in this series for the sake of hitting.
Knows when to pull off the hits.
Exactly. And his hits created scoring chances all series long. His play in the final seconds, this game, in game 6, on the forecheck, where a lot of guys just coast in as the final couple seconds wear off, and it leads to the Hartman goal that tied the game at 1. I think those guys were outstanding. And those guys showed something that would leave you optimistic about where they might fit next year. And, we've talked about their contracts and everything a lot, where it's in a vacuum. Both of those guys at $4 million, every team in the league would grab a guy like that at $4 million if they can play like they played. If Hartman can play like he played in this series, and Foligno can match what he did this year.
Hartman, we talked after the 8-game suspension that it really obviously put the Wild in a big time bind, just because of their cap situation, and made them shorthanded in myriad ways and things like that, because they couldn't call up guys. And
it put him in a spot where I think Hines and Guerin both were like, enough's enough with this guy.
That's what I wanted to ask. So, I think that you and I both talked about how this was probably going to be leading to him getting traded this offseason if they could move him. Now, do you even consider it? I mean,
Well, we got Phil is on patrol here. Apparently, we've got some major issues going on in the Shoreview neighborhood.
Phil.
There it is. Yep, it's just that Margot came home. Well, Phil had to make sure she was welcomed. It's always a tough question to answer when you say, would you consider it? Because if somebody blows you away with an offer, you consider it. But I don't think he's a guy now that you'd be out shopping. I think what they saw from him down the stretch and in this playoff could be something in a postseason meeting to say, hey, look at what you were capable of doing when you played the game this way. How about we have a great offseason, come back next year in the best shape of your life, and let's see if we can't do this for 82 games. And let's see if we can't rediscover the Ryan Hartman who scored 33 at even strength a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And maybe all of a sudden he's a guy that you consider playing in a role higher in your lineup.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that he showed everybody why Bill Guerin had such faith in him and things like that this past 2 seasons ago. Spurgeon and Brodin, obviously they both showed how important that they are to this lineup, but they also are 2 defensemen that suddenly they have no trade protection that they've previously had, much lightened. Brodin has no trade protection after July 1, and Jared Spurgeon's no trade clause becomes just a 10 team, meaning that he can go to 21 others. Do you think that they would consider moving these guys, considering how much money they make? We know how important Brodin is to the lineup, but he's 31 years old, and it's gotten to the point where you can almost guarantee that he's going to miss 25, 30 games a year. And then Spurgeon, I think, had a great year, but he's 35. And they've got to, they just gave up a load for David Juracek. They got Zeev Boyum coming. You have Brock Faber, who's obviously the future cornerstone defenseman on this team. What do you think happens there?
I would not. And there's a couple reasons. One is that, yes, they've missed some games, but it sure feels like the last couple, it's been kind of freak injuries where it's a blocked shot leads to a broken bone. Well, that isn't necessarily like a deteriorating injury where it's coming back over and over again. And when you look at how much they leaned on Brodin down the stretch, some of those nights where he and Faber played 32, 34 minutes, doesn't look like a guy who's slowing down in that way. And you look at this series, there were a lot of things in this series that if you would have told me going in they were going to happen, I would have said then the Wild win the series. And one was, if those defensemen were able to handle the big, heavy forwards of Vegas, the big heavy forwards of Vegas were a non-factor. I mean, until Game 6, Eichel and Stone did nothing, and they were playing against Minnesota's top 4 the whole series. Jared Spurgeon, a +6 going into last night's game, which was third best in all of the playoffs. Brodin and Faber shutting those guys down. I mean, Eichel had 1 even strength assist through the first 5 games, and most of that's against Faber and Brodin. I just think those guys showed, and, I know there were some, this is just typical of the Wild. They can't handle the big physical guys. Vegas couldn't get to the inside against Minnesota. That was this
what was so frustrating about
series.
The Mark Stone goal. Is that the first time we saw something like that?
Right. Other than on the power play when you've got 5-on-4 and they occasionally had guys free on the power play, they did nothing to the inside.
Bruce Cassidy talked about how last night talked about how good the Wild were keeping them from getting to the middle all series. And then, obviously Stone has the great game yesterday. Let's talk about Kaprizov and Boldy. Obviously huge series. But it did feel like the last 2 games they started. I don't know if it was the minutes that caught up to them. I don't know if it's, they went head to head against like that. When they put Carlson back on that line with Stone and Eichel, you're talking about 3 Selke type guys. I know that Jack Eichel before this year was not considered Selke worthy, but this year he absolutely was. Stone has won Selkes, and we know Carlson is one Selke. He's also one of the best defensive forwards in the league. And it just felt like the last couple games that Kaprizov or Boldy just couldn't create the space for themselves to score the way that they did early in the series.
It was a big-time matchup between 3 elite forwards on both sides. And you're talking about 3 guys that on each team that are guys that, Kaprizov ineligible, obviously, but these are guys you watch in a tournament like the Four Nations tournament they're the go-to guys in those spots. And I don't know that it was the minutes that caught up with those guys, because really it was the first game all series where Eichel was any part of a factor at 5-on-5. I mean, going into Game 6, Eichel and Stone were a combined -9, and Kaprizov and Boldy each have 5 goals. I think what we saw from Kaprizov and Boldy was 2 guys that have the ability to, as we were talking earlier, elevate their game in the playoffs. Boldy was a different player, absolutely dominant. And, last night the puck didn't find him. The puck didn't go in when they had chances. But this would go back to one of those areas of the game where if you had said going into the series that Minnesota's top line was going to produce at the level they did compared to Vegas, you would have said Minnesota wins this series, because I thought going in, Gus had to be better than Adin Hill, and he was. Minnesota's top line had to at least match Vegas's top line, and they exceeded them by almost double. And then the third was I thought they had to be at least close to even on the special teams, and they were for the most part. The Vegas will be slightly better with their power play, but remember, one was an empty netter. 2 of them were scored when they had 4-minute double minor power play opportunities. And that doesn't dismiss it. Their special teams were better, but it wasn't by the wide margin that we saw in the Dallas series or the St. Louis series, where you walked away saying Minnesota might never kill another penalty again in franchise history. So they did the things I thought they had to do, and yet they still lost the series, which is why this series just feels so different at the end. And yes, the special teams have to get better, but they were better down the stretch when the personnel changed, and I think we'll see that next year carry over. Minnesota is the only team that lost their first round series despite having an even strength goal differential advantage.
Yeah,
they're the
15
only
to 11.
one.
15 to
and
11.
I mean, think about that. The other 7 series all went to or are in the hands right now of the team that's ahead in terms of even strength goal differential.
Yeah, and they outscored them 19-18 total in the series, and obviously the 2 overtime games, big factor for that. They lost at the end 3 1-goal games in a row to end the series. Going into the series, the thing that really concerned me was the 5-6 on the Wild. Merrill completely outplayed Zach Bogosian the last 6 weeks of the season, and Bogosian really, I thought, had some hairy moments in the series, starting with highlighted by the game 5 mistake in overtime. And then, the starting with Boyum, and then sort of the contradictory sort of philosophies by the coaching staff where you say, well, we know he turned the puck over in game 1 on the 6-on-5, but why is he in the lineup if you're not putting him in that situation? And then all of a sudden you get to game 4 in overtime and you don't even play him in overtime, and it leads to a very tired Jake Middleton. And then they pull him out the rest of the way. And by the way, he doesn't get his $25,000 bonus now because he didn't play 5 postseason games. But what do you think of the 5-6? Like, to me, that's something that has got to be fixed this offseason. And maybe it's just fixed by Boyum getting a full-time, Juracek being on the team, but Bogosian's got to come into next year either traded or the number 7, right? You can't just assume that, like, if Spurgeon's still here and you have Brock Faber here, like, you can't give up a 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and Damon Hunt for David Juracek and not put him on the team.
Yeah, I think he has to earn his spot, but I'd love to go into next season with Zach Bogosian as my 7, and frankly, I wouldn't mind bringing John Merrill back as my number 8. We saw this year you're going to need 8 defensemen, and if those guys don't have to play 70 games and each of them play 40, I think you've got a couple guys that have proven value. John Merrill had a good year this year for the Wild. He was reliable. He was, I thought, defensively responsible. And I just think if those guys are playing 40 games at this point in their career, I mean, you are talking about Merrill is in his 12th season this year. Zach Bogosian was drafted. I mean, he's one of the oldest players in the league, but they both probably were overused this season, and maybe they ran out of gas. I'd love to go into next year with those guys as my 7-8, assuming that Juracek and Boyum both prove in camp that they're ready to play in the NHL.
And that obviously has to be proven, to your point. Can I interrupt for a second and ask why Margot's taking videos and pictures and where this is going?
Oh, yeah.
Nah.
Yeah, they always post the pictures.
No, we just post pictures of you.
Well, but hers will be better. Remember, Margot's a photographer.
I know, but Hannah, who runs our social media, she already has a picture of you for this podcast.
No, I'm gonna send me the picture.
No. Send me the picture, and I will decide.
I'm really impressed that you're here without a neck brace on after your car accident.
I know. I don't even know if you know that, Margot. I after game 5. We get back to the hotel at 2 a.m., have a 6 a.m. flight. I leave for the airport at 4 something. And so I'm dead tired when we land. And I get in an Uber, and my Uber guy getting on. What's the bridge that goes to Mendota Heights, leaving the airport? He's merging on it. He's yielding on it.
Mendota Bridge?
There's another thing. I guess it is. And I think it was my guy's fault, but he just somebody wasn't yielding. And next thing I know, he just swerves left to try to get out of this guy's way. And not getting on to the probably 30, 40. And my head hits the freaking passenger window. My mother's going to love listening to this because she has not been made aware of this. But I've definitely have a concussion. I've already been.
I can tell.
Yeah. I mean, last night during the game was absolutely. Now I know I've never had a concussion before. I know that shocks you. I wasn't a big athlete. My brother had a bunch playing, believe it or not, basketball is how he got his. But I was more baseball. But anyway, just loopy headache. If I turn my head a little fast, get dizzy. So I got a brutal headache. So yeah, but
it's too bad you weren't in Vegas because you could have gone back to the emergency room and said hi to your old friends there.
And then, of course, I'm just the reason why I told the timing of everything is I was dead tired, right? And I didn't even wait for I got out, the guy canceled the ride and reported it, and then I just ordered another Uber on the side of the road and left. So I'm just dude, I got to get home because we had availability at Signature when the team landed, but you could ask Joe Smith. So Joe and I, after Signature's availability, he and I went to a Caribou to write our off day story, and oh my god, my head, it was just I could barely focus, headache, all that stuff. So hopefully I'm on the mend here, but yeah, but even just last night at the game with the loud noises and staring at the screen, and yeah, it's brutal. Anyway,
He's fine.
yeah, no, and Anthony just smiling as I'm telling the story is
I'm
freaking
just
aggravating.
That, you do have a reputation of a guy that has exaggerated symptoms from time to time.
Yeah. Right? Mr. Like can't even get car insurance anymore because you guys have been in like so many cars.
Well, that's absolutely false.
How many car accidents would you say your entire family have been in the last 5 years?
Our entire family? Well, I've only been in one that was my fault, but I've been hit like 4 or 5 times.
Exactly.
Yeah. But that has nothing to do with my insurance.
Yeah.
My insurance isn't a factor.
Gianni hit the neighbor's car.
Yeah. That was like 10 years ago though. That was right when she got her license. Yeah. So it's been, we've only had one that's been our fault in.
Yeah.
It's not my fault that somebody smashes me from behind, but I didn't have to go to the emergency room or complain about a concussion.
All right. I didn't go to an emergency room. I've diagnosed myself.
Right.
So anyway, I know when trust me, I'm well aware of my head issues on a normal basis. This one's like one I haven't had on.
You know what's interesting is like I never knew it at the time, and when I was playing high school football, they didn't nobody tested for concussions back then, but I got hit one time, and I remember like laying on the ground and my coach standing over me just. Take a couple plays off, son. You've done your job, and was quite literally seeing stars. And now, when you look back, well, for sure it was a concussion. Like I remember hearing voices in my head as I was like sitting on the bench, and only really vaguely remembering the details of what happened the rest of the game. But it, like looking back, that's for sure what it was, and it luckily didn't have any lasting effects or anything.
Yeah, my high school football player told me to take a couple plays off. Coach told me to take a couple plays off once too, but that was after I faked an ankle injury.
Right, because the other guy across from me was big.
Yeah, he was growling at me, and he had a beard, and it was like JV football. And I'm just like, so not only did I fake the injury, but I was offsides doing it, and my coach knew exactly what I did. And let's put it this way, I didn't play the rest of the game. Yeah. Just a quick wrap up of the Gianni car accident in front of your house. That was the same day that that your other daughter Ariana was trying to get a new phone because she dropped it in the lake, and then Gianni calls and says she got in the accident. She immediately realized.
And Ariana looked and was like, "Oh my God! I guess I'm no way I'm getting a phone replaced."
Yeah, exactly. Let's take a quick break. Springtime has already been all over the map with cool temps, hot temps, alleged storms of the century. But summer, it's coming in hot. Get ahead of the heat and save 50% on an AC tune-up from Aquarius Home Services. I just got mine the other day with Brandon, and he was sensational. He came into my home with care, walked me through the entire process, did maintenance on my HVAC system, hosed down my air conditioner, and even left me with a couple filters. That's the type of VIP service you can get. Your system gets the full checkup, and their pros take the time to explain everything clearly. So schedule today by visiting AquariusHomeservices.com to book your tune-up now. That's AquariusHomeservices.com. Aquarius, earning the right to be recommended. And don't forget to mention that Russo sent you.
Boost your savings when you open a money market account at Royal Credit Union. For a limited time, you can get a $1,250 bonus when you bring $100,000 or more in new money to open a personal or business money market account. Royal's money market accounts have no monthly maintenance fee and tiered rates, so higher balances earn more. See details and open a money market account today at rcu.org/earn-more. Minimum deposit of $100,000 required to obtain bonus. Offer ends 5/24/25. Insured by NCU.
Hey, have you been dreaming of a lake cabin lifestyle with boating, fishing, and family fun in northern Minnesota? Well, lately I've thought a lot about how cool it would be to have a getaway like so many Minnesotans. And if you're like me, you probably think that owning your own lakeside getaway is beyond your budget. Well, if you think lake cabin real estate prices keep going up, well, think again. This is Russo, and I'm here to tell you there is an affordable way to enjoy a cabin lifestyle and all that goes with it. And yes, I said affordable. I founded a Clamshell Beach Resort, which is located on the Whitefish chain of 14 lakes for you and your family to enjoy. Here's how. Clamshell has lake homes that offer deeded fractional ownership, and the keywords there are deeded and fractional. You own it. Imagine having 5 weeks a year to enjoy Clamshell with its beaches, pool, and lodge that's full of kids' activities. Is golf your game? There's a great golf course right across the road. Like winter sports? Well, you can go ice fishing, cross-country skiing, or snowmobiling right out the door at Clamshell. And there's no maintenance, no grass mowing, no snow removal. It's done all for you. And you can own a share of Clamshell Beach Resort at an affordable price. To learn more about ownership opportunities at Clamshell Beach Resort, go to cottagesonwhitefish.com or contact Pat Egan at 612-220-9999. 9819. That's cottagesonwhitefish.com or Pat Egan at 612-220-9819. Back here, Worst Seats in the House, Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta, final segment of the show. Got some Twitter questions. It's been up for 2 hours, and I got like 350 questions, Anthony. So we won't go through all 350, but some angst in the crowd.
Yeah, there's some angst. There was also I kind of scrolled through them a little bit while I was waiting for you to get here today.
You know what my favorite one was?
No.
Does Anthony LaPanta wear a wig, or is he just naturally blessed? You are blessed.
Well, that's true. I haven't heard that one for a while. I used to get the nice toupee LaPanta shouted at me all the time.
I'm staring at it right now. It is you're naturally blessed with it's no toupee. It's not no a wig. Toupee. And you don't even use hair gel.
Well, I do use a little bit of hair gel nowadays because I've been cutting it shorter. But there were two things that were funny to me. One was that the people used to yell nice toupee on social media. I remember one guy posting one time that we must have several different toupees because it looks different all the time. And I was like, yeah, so I've got 6 or 7 of them so that, it's windy today, I'll wear my windy one. But the other one was, so literally I'm at Target Field one day doing a Twins pre and post game show. And this guy comes up and screams, nice toupee LaPanta. My barber just happened to be standing there with his son. They had stopped by to see me at the game. And I kind of looked at the guy and I said, do you think it's a toupee? And he says, yeah, nice hair, LaPanta. And I said, well, why don't you talk to him? Because he's the guy that cuts it. And my barber just laughed his ass off because he's, so I get in the barbershop the next time and all the gang at Copes, he tells the story. And I said, yeah, so you see how lousy my haircuts are? This guy thinks it's a toupee. And I gave him the opportunity to critique the guy that's responsible for cutting it.
That's pretty good. All right. Before I want to talk to you about Kirill Kaprizov's, what's going on with him this offseason. But Gus, we haven't touched on him. Obviously, I mean, I can't imagine how sick he must have been between the second and third periods for Marc-Andre Fleury to go into that position and for him to have to leave that game. But comes back. I thought he played well all series long. Kind of cool that Flower got in one game. Unfortunately, he was there at the end. I don't know if you watched the video of Flower that they had mic'd up, but it was hilarious. I didn't realize that in action he's like hooing like the woo woo. I mean, that would drive me nuts as a defenseman, by the way. But it was it was hilarious. But yeah, Gus,
he was great.
Yeah,
outplayed Hill in the series. Was one of the best goalies in the playoffs in terms of high danger save percentage, saves above expected. He did everything that the Wild could have asked. And I think the biggest thing we learned about Gus this year, based on how they used him down the stretch, remember that 7-game homestand where they just said, our season's on the line, we're playing Gus all homestand. And he took the reins and ran with them and came through in big games for this team so often. And he was terrific in this series. There one that I think he'd probably like to have back throughout the series. And other than that, I thought he was outstanding. And I think the Wild, they learned a little bit about him mentally as well as his physical ability to play the position.
And the one that he wanted to have back, which I assume you're talking about the Petra one, what was most impressive about that game is how he put it behind him.
Which is what I'm saying about mentally, because earlier in his career, we would sometimes see him get rattled in those spots. And in this case, gave up a bad one in a playoff game with a lot of pressure on him, and yet then came and played absolutely a terrific game the rest of that way.
Yeah, and if you even think of the Dallas series, other than the penalty kill, he was really good at even strength and things like that. Kaprizov, obviously, that is the big talker this offseason. Priority number one is to make sure that he is extended as soon as July 1. I think what's good news is that his agent, Paul Theophanis, and Matt Sells and Bill Guerin have seemed to have really good dialogue all season long, starting right before the season started when Paul came to town and met with them. He's been in town 4 or 5 times during the season. I always see him chatting it up with those guys. He was here for Kaprizov's first game back in the lineup after injury where he had the overtime winner. So he's seen the best of him. I think like for multiple reasons, I think that as Craig Leopold said before the season, you have to prove to Kirill that you can win here long term. But I do think he loves it here. I think he loves his teammates. And I just think when the Wild offer him 120 or 128 million on July 1 and probably before, that you've got to assume that that's going to be enticing for him to just say, you know what, I'm not going to risk not signing and then getting hurt next year and missing 40 games.
Right. And we've talked about it, what it would take for somebody else to match the full value of the contract. I mean, let's just say it's 8 years for Minnesota and they give him, let's say $13.5 million, $14 million. I mean, then you're talking about the value overall of the contract that is 112, 120 million, somewhere in that neighborhood. And for somebody to match that at 7 years, they'd have to go to 18 million a year. And I just don't know.
Well, the Wild could give him 120 million right on July 1, and another team would have to give, and that would be what, 16 million? And that would be 17.1.
Well, if you went 15 million at 8 years, that's 120 million. Right. So if you do that, 15 at 8, if somebody else to get to set, and you're taking the risk that in that next year something happens, and why walk away from that? I believe that he looks around this team, and when you start to look, Eriksson Ek might be on the best contract in the NHL. He's going to be here for 4 years. You've got Matt Boldy, a budding star. You've got Brock Faber, a budding star. Like, you've got Yurov coming. You've got, the potential. If you don't have Marco Rossi, you've got somebody like him at about that same age level in your lineup. I just think you got Buyam coming. You've got a defensive core that's stabilized. I think when you look at this and you say the Wild were right there with one of the teams to beat in the West, playing $15 million under the cap, what would lead you to believe that you can't win here?
Yep. All right, let's go to some Twitter questions, and then I do want to wrap up by just quickly going over some of the other playoff series with you. And by the way, Mike Sullivan, the new head coach of the New York Rangers, not a shock at all. All right, Twitter. Let me find it. Is Wallstedt ready to take over the backup role next season, or do you think they add a vet backup for a year and let him be playing in the NHL? I think they are still coming in thinking he is the backup. I think they'll sign some sort of number 3-ish, but I think that the plan is for that goalie to be in Iowa, not the backup here.
I agree, and I think what Gus showed down the stretch is that Wallstedt can be a number 2 that's a legit number 2 that you just lean on for 25 games if he's not ready for more. And if it was different, it would be different if you were wondering if your number 1, let's say your number 1 was a 42-year-old Marc-Andre Fleury, where you thought number 2 had to play 35, 40 games. That's not the case here. So I think they're more likely to believe in Wallstedt, let him learn on the job and get settled in.
Yep. Cody Larson asked David Juracek if he sticks around all this summer with Andy Ness and improves like Rossi did. Can we expect him to be in the lineup next season? One thing I will say is it's not even so much Andy Ness. It might be their strength program, because he's not, him and Buyam need to, put on some muscle. Buyam really needs to put on some muscle. I don't know how you could do that. But I think they both need to probably stick around. And I do think when you give up this type of amount of assets, you got to make sure that you put him in a position where he could be on the team. And so I do think that as long as he's recovered, that he's got that shot.
Yeah, and when we saw him, John Hines a couple times had made reference to that. You saw glimpses of the skill set that had him drafted in the top 6. And if you can play him on your third set, and let's just say in an ideal world that Buyam comes in and looks like he's ready for a big time top 4 role, which I don't know that he will be. Who knows? We'll see. But if all of a sudden you've got a third set that maybe has a guy like Juracek with maybe a stabilizer like Middleton or something on your third set, now maybe it's easier for him, rather than ask your third set to be 2 guys learning their way into the NHL like Juracek and Buyam. So we'll see how that all plays out. There's a lot of time for that to work itself out, and those players will work it out based on what their offseason's like. There are a couple that caught my eye. It's interesting. They're different than the speculation about next year. One is the NHL. There was a question about, would the NHL consider changing the offside challenge rule? And obviously they're going back to Nyquist, and I had so many people that made comments to me along the way, like, this is not what the spirit of the challenge was supposed to be. It was supposed to be egregious offsides or offsides that led directly to a goal. I was actually talking to Mike Modano about this last night during an intermission, and I said, who gets to decide?
Yeah.
Like what's egregious and what's not. Who's an impact on the goal and who's not. I mean, once you went to where you were going to review it, it now is 1 inch offside is the same as 3 feet offside. Offside is offside. You can't have somebody arbitrarily look and say, well, he was offside, but he was a non-factor in the play, so we're going to let that one go. There's just no way.
And Wild fans, when Paul Stastny in 2014 was offsides on a couple game-winning goals in that series, I don't think that Wild fans felt like
Now, here's another one that I found interesting, and I won't name a couple of the people that he names in the tweet, but the question was why the national media is so complimentary of the team, Coach Hines, Bill Guerin, for building a roster that's competitive, 80% of a payroll, and so committed to a disciplined style, and yet local media members seem to trash them and second guess them, and they actually did specifically single you and Joe Smith out to say not necessarily the beat writers from The Athletic, but the other media. And I thought about it a little bit, and there's a couple things that come to mind. One is that a lot of the local media that I'm sure they refer to are not people that are avid followers of the NHL. They're guys that they're not around a team and probably aren't quite as informed as some others. But the second thing is, we've talked about this before. You go to any fan base in the NHL, and there's a couple things they're always talking about. One is how many soft goals their goalie gives up, and two is how they don't shoot it enough on the power play in every single market. And it's because that's the team they watch every night. So they see the flaws. And in fairness to some of the local media members, number one, when you quickly, in a knee-jerk fashion, voice your displeasure, the same voice of a frustrated fan, with really no repercussions or understanding of what went into that decision, it gets attention and it gets traction and it gets clicks, it gets followers, it gets likes. When you can just sit on your couch and say, well, this guy sucks, he doesn't shoot the puck enough on the power play. Well, that's not quite that easy. And we've talked about this so many times that when you watch a goalie play 82 games, you see all 10 soft ones that he gives up. You watch a goalie, you don't see the one that the other team gives up over the course of the night. So I think there's a little bit there where it's, people that are around the team more are not the people that are looking at this and second guessing every decision or questioning where this team is headed. I think the national media is an interesting perspective from this tweet, is that when every set of broadcasters come in and they talk about, wow, it's amazing what this team has done this far underneath the cap. Kaprizov and Boldy look like dominant players. Faber looks like a stud. Gus looks great in goal. Boy, this team is so disciplined. Their defensive structure is so tight. That's what somebody who watches every team in the league thinks. So sometimes it's the people that are that live in more of like a bubble where the Wild are the only team they watch. They tend to be more critical. So I hope that answers the question that the fan asks.
I don't disagree. The only thing I will say is that, like every time you talk about anything with the Wild, you can't always, and by the way, they're, 14,
that's true.
And so you can't do that every single time. And when these guys come in seldomly, they're looking at it from a big perspective and they're saying, wow, it's amazing. The Wild are on par with the Vegas Golden Knights, if not better in a lot of these games.
Playing $15 million below the cap. And that's kind of my point, is that the people that are around it every day, they forget sometimes to look at it from that. When we talked to Eddie Olczyk before he did, game 4 in St. Paul, and he said, I've watched this series, and he said, Minnesota is every bit as good as Vegas, top to bottom, and they're doing it 15. That's the first thing he says, is they're 15 million under the cap, and yet they've matched these guys shift for shift through the first 3 games of the series. And he said, and the Wild Stars, they're as deep as anybody's star power in the NHL right now, which, think about that for a minute. With the years we've covered this team, this was the first time going into a series where you said, the Wild have the biggest stars in this series.
Yeah, the 2 best players on the ice for the most part.
Yeah, and maybe 4 if you include Eriksson Ek and Faber.
Yeah.
I mean, Faber was the best defenseman for either team in this series.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw a lot of weirdness. I know that Faber didn't score, and he didn't, I don't think he had a point in the series and didn't have a bunch of shots, but from a cornerstone defenseman standpoint, to defend the way he did, obviously he made the one mistake on the one goal, but that goal happens he doesn't react right away by retreating, but that goal happens. It was a super long shift for Kaprizov and Eriksson Ek, and they just didn't back check. They didn't have the energy, the pace to back check on that Stone to Eichel breakaway. But Faber probably needs to get back right away.
Yeah, and that play is interesting. As I went back to think about it, if Kaprizov doesn't dive and he keeps skating,
I think he dives because he doesn't have the legs at that point.
Right. And so that was
it was a minute 15 shift for him.
And so him going all or nothing. Now he misses it by an inch. Mm-hmm. So think about this series.
He kind of pushes it.
Nyquist offside by an inch. Kaprizov, if he's 1 inch further and he gets his stick on that puck, that it never happens. But I was just wondering, if he keeps skating, there's a chance that he's able to prevent Eichel from going across to his forehand. You know what I mean? Because I don't think he catches up with the play, but he might at least have been able to take away that move and keep Eichel on his backhand. He went for the all or nothing play and came up just short. Terrific play by Stone, and that shouldn't be overlooked. I thought it was interesting how Cassidy compared it to Kaprizov's pass to Boldy, although he calls him Kaprizov every time he says it. But because it was similar. Kaprizov's pass to Boldy in Vegas early in the series was one of the most amazing passes I've seen, and Stone's there on that play was pretty close, and it was similar.
Yes. Somebody just sent a tweet, by the way, to Joe Smith and me. It says it's a Photoshop of 3 beers. One says Gary Anderson, one says Blair Walsh, the other says Gus Nyquist. It says the Gary Anderson is still the most bitter to swallow, because he and I in our story today said this wasn't as damning as Gary Anderson or Blair Walsh.
Yeah,
it kind of was. Let me just see a couple more tweets. Of course, I lost all my tweets that I liked. Well, let's just quickly talk about the offseason. What do you expect? Do you still expect that Brock Nelson is probably the leading target?
I haven't.
A lot of people ask about Sam Bennett.
Yeah,
Sam Bennett's going to cost a lot of money, and he's so highly sought.
I haven't given any thought to who might fit. I think the biggest question is what happens with Marco Rossi. And we've talked. You've said that you confirmed that there had been the offer that coincidentally was just what I just pulled out of the blue, like 5x5. And to me, I still think that's a number that if I'm either side in that negotiation, I think it's a good deal. But if he's not willing to take that and is demanding more, I think it forces I think the Wild have to trade him. I don't think he'd get more than that on an offer sheet. I don't know if you agree with me on that, but yeah. I think it's unlikely that somebody'd give a much more than that, maybe 6, but it's 6.9 is the cutoff to where it becomes a first, second, and third are the compensations at that point.
Yeah. Yes, because 6.8, I'll tell you exactly what a first and a third would be, because I pulled that today. I think so. A first and a third would be 4 point. This is on last year's numbers, because remember, it'll be
but close, somewhere in the neighborhood.
So it'll be 4.580 to 6.871 as a first and a third, and then just above 6.871. I mean, if somebody offered him at 6.871, like that probably is enough to make the Wild say we'll take the compensation.
Take the first and the third.
And it might. They're not giving him that.
I don't think so. I don't think anybody's going to offer him more than 6 on an offer sheet. But so I think that's the most interesting thing, because that probably then, if it's a trade with Rossi, now it changes who you might be targeting. But I haven't given any thought to the free agent
traded
market
around the draft, because to me, the Wild have to worry about an offer sheet. You have his agent, who's probably going to be very motivated, that's going to know well before. Even though you're not technically allowed, you are going to be, I think actually once he's qualified, it's tendered as QO, I think that agent is allowed to start talking to other teams, and he's going to know who could offer the compensation, and you use that as leverage to try to make a deal done with the Wild. And I don't think the Wild are going to get to July 1. If you think you can get more in a trade via what the compensation would be on an offer sheet. Last question. It was true honor for us to cover Marc-Andre Fleury. What will be your best memories of having to deal with probably the classiest guy that we've both been around?
Yeah, I think that is just realizing that everything I had ever heard about this guy and what a great teammate he was, what a great ambassador for the game, great family man, that it all turned out to be exactly true and maybe even understated. I think my favorite memory will be the night in Montreal where he gets the shutout in his hometown and the crowd is chanting for the visiting goalie. It just, those kind of nights just don't happen. And the way the entire Canadian team stayed out there to salute him, that was a night I'll never forget. And that probably will be my most memorable moment of dealing with him.
Yep, I would agree with you. Well, this was a good show, I think. Unfortunate ending to the season. Do you feel like the bill is due now? And what I mean by that is, as you said, you can't really start judging the plan until now. Like, we're never going to have to worry about the buyouts again. We're never going to use that as an excuse again. That now there's no excuses. It is now the pressure is on Bill Guerin in what's going to be his 7th season. To deliver.
I've said all along that I thought the way this plan had to be evaluated was opening night 2025. Mm-hmm. Is your team and your roster, are they looked at as one of the legit teams to beat in the West? And when I say, to me, that's usually 3 or 4 teams that you look at. Like this year for me, when I looked at the West and I thought it was Colorado, it was Dallas, it was Vegas. I thought those 3 were different than everybody else going into the season. And I think Minnesota's got to be one of the teams in that conversation. I think they will, with the way the core of this team is built, assuming that, nothing significant happens in the offseason that sets them back. And I think you have to be in that, because then from there forward, a million things can happen, injuries, good fortune, bad fortune that can change all of that. But if you go into the season with a roster that everybody's looking at as this is one of the legit contenders in the West, then I think that the plan has probably put together an adequate roster. And I think they will. I think when you look at, we had a fan ask us at one of the shows recently, like, what's your biggest reason for optimism? And for me, it's because when you look at this lineup up and down, there isn't a bad contract in the bunch. There isn't a contract that is, how in the world are you going to overcome paying that guy that amount of money? In a vacuum, every deal the Wild have in place, I think is a good value for the team for what they're getting.
Yep, I don't disagree, which is, ironic.
It's probably because you're concussed.
Yeah, it is. Well, I was even just thinking on the way. Actually, I've been thinking this really honestly all season, because we've seen how great Marcus Foligno is, and like the fact that we've all at the beginning were kind of grouping him in with all the. I think it was more like the no moves with all 3 extensions at the same time. That was the only thing I didn't love. But you look at all 3 of those guys; they've all made impacts. Although I didn't love Zuccarello's postseason, I thought he looked a little.
Yeah, part
tired,
of that was
sloppy.
I didn't think his line was great.
Yeah, which again, no longer 15.7 under the including the Rossi, no longer that under the cap. That's where the depth hurts.
Right.
Is that the Wild always had trouble finding that second scoring line, especially after you and I opened this postseason by questioning on whether or not you really wanted to load up the top line. Obviously, it worked from a production standpoint, but it probably affected the other 3 lines just because they put their 3 best players on one line. All right, thanks to our sponsors. Again, pay attention to our social media, because there's a chance we even do a live podcast next week. But we will certainly have one at some point in the month of May. Thanks to our incredible sponsors, Aquarius Home Services, your local authorized dealer for Connecticut water treatment systems, Clamshell Beach Resorts, not reports, Giggly THC Beverages, Onyx Maps and Fish, Twill and the Edina Galleria, and Royal Credit Union. Talk to you next week, everybody.
So much coming.